This week, the U.S. Marshal Service found 25 missing children in Ohio, and last week they rescued 39 missing kids in Georgia. All this part of a long-running mission known as Operation Not Forgotten. It's estimated that there are thousands of trafficking victims in the United States each year. Joining me now to discuss the issue of human trafficking in the United States and around the world and why these recent rescues are making so very little news is attorney and child advocate Liz Yore. Liz, welcome back to the program. How significant is this recovery of scores of children in Georgia and Ohio when we look at human trafficking, specifically child trafficking in the U.S.?
Raymond, this is very significant. The Trump administration from day one really made a strong effort and emphasis and initiative on all sorts of levels, state, federal, and local, to really find these vulnerable children. And many of these vulnerable children are runaways, endangered runaways, what they call throwaway children, children from foster care, children who have been very, very vulnerable and involved in all sorts of heinous abuse. And as a result, they become victims almost immediately to human traffickers. And we know that in the United States, there are probably around over 400,000 missing children. Many of those children get snared in the trap of human trafficking. It's a very lucrative business. We know that the cartels are involved in it. The gangs, the street gangs are involved in it. ISIS is involved in human trafficking because although drugs are sold and then they can't be sold again, children, women, boys can be resold. And for example, one child can make around $250,000 a year for a trafficker. These initiatives, and what's really exciting about this is that the U.S. Marshals are uniquely suited to finding missing children. They execute warrants on missing persons all the time. And this has been a coordinated effort. We've heard a lot about, in these riots, the federal government saying there needs to be a partnership with local, state, and the Fed. That's what's happening in human trafficking. These children are being found as a result of task forces with state and local, with the marshals really heading it up. And millions of dollars are being diverted from other programs by the Trump administration into human trafficking. Ivanka Trump, Trump's daughter, has been very active in really promoting this. And, quite frankly, I know that your audience, Raymond, is very engaged in trying to help children. I've seen that time and time again. The media, not so much.
Liz, children make up 27% of all human trafficking victims worldwide, and 2 out of every 3 identified child victims are girls. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally, with hundreds of thousands in the United States. Where does most trafficking in the U.S. occur? In what cities and states? And how do these traffickers find their victims?
That's a great question. Well, for example, the #1 destination, state destination, is Florida. The locale where the trafficking most often occurs is in motels, the flea bag motels. How they get these children, an array of ways. One, sometimes parents drug-addicted parents turn over their children to traffickers for money, as heinous as that is. Oftentimes, it's foster care kids who go on the run. And, these traffickers know exactly where the foster care group homes are. So these girls and boys will often go running, and within 20 minutes, they're picked up by traffickers who promise them, I'll get you a meal, I'll drive you to your home. And before they know it, they're involved in this awful, illegal, horrible web of human trafficking that they can't get out of. And so we know hotels should be trained. We know even these kids from foster care. Now, when I was doing human trafficking investigations, to my horror, I learned that children in foster care were trafficked internationally. And the Super Bowl, they'd go down to these Caribbean islands. they would where the people and predators were, that's where the children went. And so there's an array of ways in which that happens. There's over 25,000 what we call endangered runaways in the United States. Those children often run to places like Portland and Seattle. And what troubles me so as we go through this horrible summer is that law enforcement resources are being spent, Raymond, on dealing with the rioters and not in finding these children who are missing and who are endangered, who many of them are living on the street. And so as a result, we really have to reorder our priorities. And that's why I think these arrests and recoveries in Ohio and Georgia are so exciting.
Yeah. Now, the Trump administration has set aside about $35 million to help these trafficking victims. But the administration has also been criticized, Liz, for inserting this line in the grants application beginning in 2018 for aid to trafficking victims. It reads, direct representation on vacatur, to set aside a judgment, or expungement matters through court filings or through other litigation services is not allowable, an allowable cost under this cooperative agreement, okay? Now, many victims have to deal with criminal charges due to the activities they were involved in when they were trafficked, even if those activities were not of their choosing. What legal help is there for these victims of human trafficking that are involved in prostitution or other activities before they escape from the traffickers?
Well, there has been a number of states that have efforts to identify victims, to decriminalize human trafficking victims in the court system, and to divert them to resources like this $35 million, which will be going directly to resources. And frankly, Raymond, there has been virtually no money until now going towards the victims. These are highly traumatized girls and young girls who oftentimes at the age of 12, that's the average age, these girls are lured into prostitution or human trafficking. So by the time they're 16, 17, they have been through, the trauma of human trafficking is beyond imaginable. And so as a result, this money spent on resources is absolutely critical. There's been virtually, they recover these kids and then they're off on the street, back on the street, because they have nowhere to go. And so this $35 million will be well spent in finding homes, a safety net, psychological testing and counseling for these girls, employment help, so these girls can rebuild their lives.
I only have about 2 minutes here, Liz, so I need to cover something else with you, and this is kind of a two-parter. There's been very little coverage of these rescues of these girls and these human trafficking victims in the press here in the U.S., but there was a piece in the New York Times Magazine last weekend that sought to depict men caught in these child sex stings as somehow being victimized or victims of entrapment. Your thoughts on the New York Times advocacy and the lack of coverage in general about this human trafficking topic and those who've been rescued?
There's been precious little done to really punish the Johns, the men who procure these children. And as a result, to paint them as victims is absurd. The more we can identify them, put their pictures in the paper, prosecute them, the better. The reason why, I think it's a multi-phase reason why there's very little coverage on the recovery. First of all, these are vulnerable children. And the media has no time for vulnerable children. They don't want to give they think that the public isn't interested, when in fact, the public wants to do whatever they can, big or small, to help these children. And so as a result, the success of recovering children, getting these Johns off the street and prosecuted, getting these traffickers behind bars for decades is important work, and it sends a signal, a deterrent signal, not only to the children that somebody is looking for them. And that was an interesting comment in the articles about the Georgia case and the Ohio case. The children were saying, I didn't know anybody was out there looking for me. It's so good to know someone's looking for me. And so with respect to that, there needs to be more coverage. And we need the public to have eyes and ears on human trafficking. It's in plain sight. And we also need to have good foster parents, good adoptive parents, and quite frankly, having the Catholic Church build schools and high schools and centers in the inner city, be that safety net for these children who often become victims of human traffickers.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz, for your insight and your passion. I know you've dedicated much of your life to this topic. You can follow Liz Yore's work at Yore, Y-O-R-E, children.com. And if you know of or suspect cases of human trafficking in your area, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They're at 888-373-7888. 888-373-7888. The information is on your screen. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.